A government's capacity to invest in its people and sustainable development is dependent on the nation's ability to facilitate fiscal consolidation. According to the NESG Fiscal Policy Roundtable, taxation plays a critical role in this regard, and this brings to bear the need to find a long-lasting, sustainable solution to the funding gaps of the federal government, especially post-COVID-19. Now, the group explains in a recent report that tax is the cornerstone of an effective nation, an initiative that activates productivity and economic growth. Well, joining us now to examine some of the barriers to tax compliance and to proffer possible solutions is the co-chairman of the NESG Fiscal Policy Roundtable, Dr. Suleyman Ndanusa. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Good morning.
So the NESG Fiscal Policy Roundtable has recommended taxation as a key fiscal action that governments must embrace, especially post-COVID-19. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, indeed, taxation is the cornerstone of any development. Without taxation, then there won't be any social contract, because what guarantees social contract between people and the government is taxation, so that people will pay tax and expect to be given all the facilities, the protection that they need. The roundtable, the NESG roundtable, has been working very hard. One of the things they did was to conduct a survey of the morale to pay tax in Nigeria, and the results were not very good, because there is so much low morale in paying tax in Nigeria. And the reasons are, one, the issue of trust, transparency, and the complexity of the tax system itself, both in law, administration, and of course the policies. And so many other things were found to lower the morale to pay tax. And therefore, citizens are seeking for social contract. There has to be fiscal exchange. They want to see things that their monies, if they pay tax, what are they going to get from government? Are there good infrastructure? Are there roads, electricity, etc.? If there are none, then obviously it shakens the social contract. So a lot of this morale, until government does something about improving the morale to pay tax and making sure that there is accountability, making sure that it's easy to pay tax in Nigeria, it will be very difficult. And that's exactly what the NESG roundtable and of course the government itself is doing, of improving ease of paying tax in Nigeria, because Nigeria is one of the countries around the world that is so difficult to pay tax, even if you are willing.
Well, having said that, Dr. Ndanusa, let me ask you, what's your assessment of how the pandemic has impacted the new VAT policy in Nigeria?
Well, the pandemic has affected business generally. Productivity, economy, it has affected the productivity of our economy. And the VAT, you pay VAT, you pay tax because you are active in the economy, buying. Consumers are buying, consumers are spending, and therefore companies are producing and people are buying. And because of the pandemic, what it has caused globally at the supply chain and what it has caused also domestically, it has affected business. And for that reason, even though the rate has been increased from 5% to 7.5%, is going to affect the revenue we get from VAT, is going to be affected in terms of volume, because the supply-demand dynamics are going to be affected. In fact, they have been affected.
With all of this now, what are the main issues that need to be fixed for Nigeria to generate enough revenue to develop the country?
Well, one very important one is we have to diversify the sources of our revenue. It's very, very important that we diversify sources of our revenue. We have to develop data. We need data about taxpayers we don't have. We have to organize the informal sector. We have to create clusters of businesses, etc., so that they can become a taxable group. And then, of course, we have to also tackle the challenges of paying tax, like I said. I think the 2019 Finance Act has done quite a bit, creating the need for TIN, that is TIN, and so many others. So basically, therefore, we also have to block the leakages. It is very important that those factors that cause low morale to pay taxes will have to be fixed. And then we have to make our economy more productive because we are so diversified. We have about 46 sectors in our GDP, if you look at the table. But the point is, most of those sectors are not productive, including agric. The value chain has to be made very productive so that we can flog the revenue out of those sectors. And until we do that, it will be very difficult because the GDP, the productivity of the economy determines how much tax you attract. Of course, by making tax easy to pay, the administration, the policies will all have to be brought together to enhance and to encourage people to pay their taxes.
If you were to recommend 3 fiscal priorities for the government, what will they be?
One is, like I said earlier on, government must diversify sources of revenue, and then government must look at how they spend the expenditure pattern that we have. It's not just collecting the taxes, it's not all just collecting the revenue, but how we spend it. For example, I would say government should, there should be spending cuts. There are a lot of, we should downsize the MDAs, we should reduce cost of governance, the NAS, the National Assembly, etc. The Orosoya report is a point in this, we have to look at how we downsize the cost of governance and the MDAs. The second one I would say we must do quickly is we must prioritize spending. Where we put our money is very important. We put our money in infrastructure that will have multiplier effect on the economy. And I would suggest that we put our money in health, which is so obvious because of the pandemics. We have been so exposed. Agric education and of course infrastructure, they are very, very important. So one, diversifying the sources of revenue, then how the expenditure pattern, spending cuts, and obviously prioritizing what we put our money on.
Now, let's look at the average Nigerian now. How do we increase domestic revenues via tax in such a way that it doesn't actually overburden them across the informal and the formal sectors?
Well, the average Nigerian has to earn revenue before he is taxed. So government must create an enabling environment so that the average Nigerian will have something to do and will become productive. One, those who are employable should be employed, and those who can be self-employed should be supported so that they can become more productive. But because without being productive, without doing something to earn revenue, it will be a burden to expect someone to pay tax for nothing. So it is important that the enabling environment will be created, and then people should be put to work either on their own and privately, entrepreneurship, and they should be supported. There has to be credit so that they can produce. We also have to encourage people to be more enterprising. And once we do that, obviously it's from what you earn that you pay government. So the burden can only be reduced when people have a source to pay to pay tax. Without a source, just like most people, the rate of unemployment is so much in Nigeria. And then, of course, even the informal sector is so disorganized that multiple taxation, etc., that have been the bane of taxation in most of the states in Nigeria is really a burden to a lot of the businesses, especially the small businesses. So there has to be a cocktail of policies, administrations, and even laws that will ensure that we create that environment that makes payment of tax easy and with very little burden.
Now, there are no doubts that the COVID-19 pandemic has had its negative impact on the economy. But if we see a decline in tax compliance post-COVID-19, what would be your advice for government to tackle this?
Like I said, one of the advice is to enhance the morale for people to want to willingly pay. People actually a lot of Nigerians are interested in paying tax. From the survey conducted by NESG roundtable, the fiscal roundtable, we discovered that so many Nigerians are actually interested, even at the local level. But the point is, one, the tax system is so complex. The tax administration is so complex. Number two, they want to see value for money. If I pay tax, I want to see that by next year, I have a clinic to go to. By next year, I have a road that is passable. By next year, I want to be secured. I want to feel government. I want to feel that the social contract between me and government is working. So I think what government should do going forward, and I'm happy that this triple crisis that Nigeria has had, because as far as I'm concerned, we have more than two crises. It's not just Corona, COVID-19, or the crash of oil. We have been having pre-existing crises of development. And that is why people are not willing to pay. If you look at what has happened to Lagos State, when Lagos State started giving dividend for democracy, dividend to taxpayers, people became more willing to pay taxes because they could see better roads to pass, they could see more secured environment, cleaner environment, etc. And it's developing, and that is why the tax revenue in Lagos has skyrocketed. So that is exactly what we want nationwide. At the state level, even at the federal level, people want an enhanced social contract that is accountable, transparent, and fair. Until government does that, and I'm sure government wants to do that. That is why even the ease of doing business generally, you can see that in the area of taxation, we are doing very bad. In fact, we did worse in 2019 than we were doing before in terms of our position. So we must improve on ease of paying tax so that people will find it easy to pay and also will be willing to pay without being forced to pay.
But when you look at it now, Nigeria has huge budget deficits, which have only been made worse by the impacts of the pandemic and the currency pressures. Now, what advice would you have for government to ensure that Nigeria is better prepared for such occurrences?
Good question. Like I said, I think we are paying for our sins of development. If we had been doing the right thing all these years, we obviously would not be needing so much money to do things that we should have done 30 years ago in terms of infrastructure. We should have had good roads, the railways would have been there, power would have been there. So if you compare it with countries that are having similar problems of pandemic, the corona pandemic and also the oil crisis, you find that because they already have an existing improvement in infrastructure, etc., they are not desperate. But you can see that because we have a pre-existing development crisis, it's the burden of raising money to do so many things at the same time, things that we should have done. Hospitals, health clinics, etc., we do not have. Everything is being done now, and that is why there is a burden. And that is what is causing this, what you just asked. That means we have deficit financing. Now, unfortunately for us, we are not the only people, globally there's this problem. America is having this problem, GDP growth minus 5. You have globally that's going to be about negative 3% growth in GDP. Most of our partners, except China, even though they are not going to be having negative distance, is just merely 1.something%. So basically, we have a deficit and financing it is becoming very difficult. Our rating, credit rating is even low, almost a junk status. And therefore, even if we're going to raise money, we have to be prepared to raise it at a higher cost. We are lucky that the pandemic has made people to sympathize globally. The multilaterals are giving some of these funds that are cheap and probably long, but definitely we are not in a good position to bargain. We are very weak, operating from a very weak position because we are desperate, which is self-inflicted because we didn't do what we are supposed to have done 30, 20 years ago, and we are having now to battle with both infrastructure, battle with pandemic, and then we have revenue crisis. So the demand supply dynamics that we are having, it's also going to affect us. So basically, the business is down. We don't have money. We are having deficit. Deficit in our body is growing, and then even to raise money to do it is becoming more and more difficult because the demand for debt financing is growing across the world. So we are competing with other nations to raise it. Other nations that have better credit rating for them to be able to attract some of these loans. So definitely it's a problem. Unless we seize this opportunity, it's a baptism of fire. We have to seize this opportunity to make some radical changes in the way we've been doing our things. We have to be more transparent, more accountable.
We would like to thank you, Co-Chairman of NESG Fiscal Policy Roundtable, Dr. Suleyman Ndanusa, for speaking with us on Business Morning.